Hi everyone, it's Amanda from the Quilting Bee in Masson, Ohio, and today I wanted to talk to you about the Friendship Braid Quilt. It is a great scrap buster if you've got leftover jelly roll strips from a past project, if you save your scraps and you cut them into 2.5-inch strips, which we're going to do a separate video on, but you just make this big long braid and you make them as long as you want your quilt to either be wide if you're going to go horizontally or length if you're going to just sew them together vertically, and then you just cut off your corners here, your little triangles, sew them all together, and you get a great little quilt top that's super scrappy, super fun. This is an example of what I'm talking about. So the twin of this is actually sitting on a pod in the shop, but you just make long braids, subcut them once you decide how wide you want your quilt top to be, and just sew them together. And I didn't mess with trying to match points. If they happen to match, great. Theoretically, maybe kind of sort of they will, but I just sew them together and I don't care. And what I love about a Friendship Braid Quilt, especially if you're just using your scraps, and you could definitely just use a whole jelly roll if you wanted to have a more cohesive look. I've done one just out of the chickadee jelly roll that we have in the shop, so it's all poppy cotton. But I look at this and it's reminiscent of past projects or fabrics when they came through the door. So when I look and I can see poppies and posies, or the buttons that we first got in from Riley Blake, the first M&S textiles that we got in the door is right here. Color collage from Northcott that came out 2 years ago now. So I look at them as sort of reminiscing through projects past. I can look at the fabrics and remember, oh, we used that in this quilt, or I remember when it came through the door and we just fell in love. So it's a fun scrap buster, gives you all kinds of fun memories of your past projects, and you zoom through. You just absolutely zoom through this. So I want to show you how I got this set up. So what do you need to do the Friendship Quilt? I use 2.5-inch by 7 or 7.5-inch strips. So when I have leftover jelly rolls, unless I think I'm going to save them for some other jelly roll project, I will subcut that into 7-inch strips. That way I get 6 strips out of each jelly roll strip. I then sort of sort them like I did in my color zones, and then as you go through assembling your Friendship braid sections, you can just grab from each different colorway and go. I did have some yardage scraps that I went ahead and also cut into 2.5 by 7. You want them to be pretty much the same size, because otherwise if you do too skinny, too fat, and mix them all together, you run the risk of things not lining up correctly when you go to trim off all those corners, and you could get too skinny of a strip or just run into issues. So keep them all consistent. I do the 2.5 by 7-inch rule. You could definitely make them longer. That would give you wider braids, but again, just keep that length and width consistent. So let me show you how we're just going to start this, and you just go until you have as many braids as you want, and then we'll get to the cutting part. So what I like to do when I'm getting started on my next braid is go through and pick out maybe 10 to 12 of my pieces, just so I can kind of have them laid out and ready to go, so I'm not digging each and every time. And I'll do this in 10 to 12 piece batches until I'm getting as long as I want my strips to be. What I'm working on right now, and I'll give you a shot of that, is 20 strips on each side. So I go through, and the scrappier the better in my opinion. So I purposely go through and start to just pick strips, different prints and that kind of thing, and just create a pile here on my desk. These are all from the same collection, so I'm actually going to mix these up and just intersperse maybe so they're tossed in the middle. One of the other things I have right to the right of my sewing machine setup is my portable pressing table that has my mini iron on it. So I have this guy right next to my machine. So you do want to press after every seam so everything is laying flush. You'll see why, because we need everything to be straight as we go so it doesn't end up really wonky. So I did break out my little TV tray that I did the YouTube tutorial on how to make your own. So that guy is sitting right here. I actually, as I start sewing then, I have my strips in their organized baskets here on one of my trolleys that I did the video that I like to get from Michael's. I pull that right up to my sewing machine. So this sits right here. So I actually tuck myself in and I can sew, I can press real quick, and I can grab more strips. So this is a tub that's actually labeled Friendship Braid. So I put scraps that I think would be fun in a Friendship Braid quilt in here. They are already cut to 2.5 inches. I do cut all of my pieces to 2.5 by 7.5 inches, so these would get trimmed down a bit. You can see it's pretty bare. I have a batik in here that I thought would be fun to cut up if I ever need some filler pieces. But I'm actually going to take a few of these and cut them to use in what I already have set up. So what I did was I went through my bin and I kind of created color zones. So sort of my turquoise, greens, blues, yellows, pinks and reds, more blues, purples, black and white, and there's some taupes and things. So that way, as I work through my braid, I go to each pile to give it some variation. And I also want to make sure, if we look at this piece, that I haven't repeated too frequently in a row. That way it's going to get scrappier. And if I started with, I think I started with my black and white and my rainbow. When I start my next, once I decide how long I want this to be, I'll start at the opposite end just so they fall more scrappy. So what I have set up then at my sewing station is my little handy dandy trolley of my scraps, of course my machine, and then I have my pressing station, because you do want to press as you go. So all you do to start this is you're going to take one strip, take your next strip, put them right sides together, perpendicular to each other. Okay, so line up these two corners, and then you're just going to do a stitch along this side. This is going to end up getting cut off, but this is what starts your braid. So I'm just going to stitch along this side, just using a 1/4 inch seam like we always do. I'm going to take this to my pressing table and press. It's going to be a little awkward because this is going to be just attached to nothing. So I press a little bit more just so it starts to lay flat. Take your next strip, lay it right sides together along this long edge, and just stitch along this edge. Now I'm going to take this to my mat, press that full seam, and if you're getting the gist of it, the next one I'm going to place along this edge and attach to this whole piece. If you've got anything that's directional, you want to make sure you think about how that's going to lay. So this is writing, so I'm making sure that this is going to be right side up. So we're just going to stitch this. Again, I'm going to go press, and I will continue this process where I press this side, then lay a strip on this side, and then this side, and that's what builds up your braid. sew as many braid strips as you like. I determine a random number and then just use that as my length. I use 20 on my left side. So once I got to 20 strips on my left side, I started another braid. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 braids. So I've got 7 braids that are all almost as tall as I am. So I'm 5'4", so we'll call them 5 foot. That feels good, 60 inches. So now we have to trim them up. And what you're going to do is just take this to your cutting mat, and what we're trimming off are the end triangles that aren't sewn to anything. I'm going to show you a finished piece so you can see what I mean. So you can see all of those end pieces got trimmed off. So assuming everything was sewn accurately, you should be able to just start at one end, lay your ruler flat, keep it even. You can use your center stitch as your guide on your ruler. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. And just trim off all of these bits, and you end up with a braid in a straight rectangle. Starting at my opening at the bottom. First thing you're going to do is square off your bottom. That kind of gives you that straight edge that you're going to start with. The waist police are going to come after me for this, but I happen to love a friendship braid, and I just accept that there's going to be some loss. So I am laying my ruler, and I'm aligning a couple things here. Hopefully you can see. Number one, so you can see where my points are for every braid. I'm using a line on my long ruler to make sure I'm intersecting my 13-inch line at those 2 points. That gives me a straight frame of reference. So I'm going to trim off all of this to get my beginning starting point. Using this as our straight edge. And again, so this ruler is 6.5 inches. I used a 7.5 inch strip, so it's not going to be wide enough for me to lay and cut evenly. So I'm going to take my ruler, and on starting with one side, aligning, this is our straight edge here at the bottom. So I have to get that straight, and then I'm just going to keep wiggling my ruler to get to those points. Now I'm also, this center 3-inch line happens to coincide through my points, so that sort of helps me get peace of mind that I'm not completely off. And I'm just going to trim off these tips. So now we have to align both with where we've already trimmed off, and then again get to that point, and you're pretty much trimming off at about where each of your points meet. I'm also using my 3-inch line. It's getting a little wonky, but that's the nature of the braid. And you have to be careful as you get to the end. It's going to be so long that it's not going to lay straight. So that's why you're seeing me do this little bit of alignment here. So I'm going to align right here along this edge at that point. And then we're going to turn this and trim the other edge. So what you end up with is a long rectangular piece of braid. So I'm going to trim up all my pieces, and then we have to decide if we want everyone to go in the same direction or if we want to flip-flop our braids. So we have going up, coming down, going up, going down. Now I found as I started moving through all my strips, at first I was saying, you know, cut across the bottom. Now what I like to do when I'm trimming up these strips is I actually start to cut up one side. I'm right-handed, so I'm doing this side first. And really, where you're trying to cut is just here along this edge, because we just want to cut off these points. Now, if your strips were not all exactly 7.5 inches, you're going to find you have a little wonkiness. So you may be trimming along, everything's great, and then you have one where you have to come in a bit. That's okay. I find the friendship braid to be very forgiving, but what I like to do is just start trimming on one side so I can kind of get a gauge of one straight edge to cut across. So I'm going to go ahead and nip these off, and you have to be careful as you go up. If you were too far in, you're not catching all those points, and which is fine, that's more forgiving. But if you're too far over, so let's say I had my ruler here, you can see there's going to be a gap, and we don't want that. So you want to make sure you are at least catching right up to the edge. So I'm going to start here, get those out of the way. And now I want to cut straight across using this as my straight edge. So I'm going to take my ruler, a line along the bottom here to this edge, get that straightened up. Make sure I've got a straight cut coming all the way across past that intersection point, and I do. So I will trim that up. And then just keep trimming off these points. So again, we're going to trim at the side, making sure where you're trimming across is going to go past that intersection point. So I sort of use a line up here, so I'm using my 3-inch line as a guide to keep me past that point, and then coming down here and aligning my ruler so I get a nice straight edge. So if I come back up, where I'm cutting this off might be a little close. So I'm going to bring this down a bit more. That way, as I cut all the way across, I'm past this intersection point. So I know I've got more than enough room to straighten this. Turn. And your rectangles, because if your strips aren't all the same length, may be different widths in the end, but again, it doesn't matter. The way this all goes together, it's not going to be glaringly noticeable. There's no negative space in this quilt. So I think that makes it very forgiving because you just don't see what you would normally see. So the final planning step with a friendship braid is deciding which way you want your braids to go. Meaning, do you want them all to point up or down, or do you want to alternate like I started to do over here? I have points going down, up, so I can see which effect I like. This smaller sample that's from one of the pods, you can see I did the same thing. I alternated the points. I personally think it's a little bit more forgiving if you alternate because you tend to look less for matching points. I don't try to match up my points on these suckers. Some of my strips may have been 2¼ inches, some a little bit more than 2½ inches. It's a friendship braid. Friends are forgiving. So you just have to decide which way you want everything to go. Maybe you're gonna do 2 up, 2 down. You do you. I'm gonna go ahead and alternate, zip these together, and then trim my top and bottom so they're square. Make sure the whole quilt top is square, and then we're done. I wanted to show you so you can see as I go to stitch these. This first strip is about 1/2 inch wider than this strip. I'm not worried about that because you're not going to really see that after you stitch it together. So what's most important to me is just lining up on the one side, giving it a good 1/4 inch seam, and moving on. So don't worry about trying to get all of your strips to be the same width. Again, it's a very forgiving pattern. Another reason I say I don't even try to match seams, your starting points are going to be different for every rectangle. So you can see there's no way I was going to meet these seams. So I truly do just stitch and go and square it up. Don't get caught up in trying to make anything match. It's a braid. Once you decide which way you want your braids to go, so if you're going to alternate or go in the same direction, you might want to label or lay it out correctly and not trust yourself to remember, because otherwise you're going to sew them with the points going in the wrong direction and have to rip your seam. But that's okay, because our seam ripper, Jack, is our friend. And we don't fear Jack. We appreciate Jack. I don't appreciate it. But in my defense, it's 6:30 in the morning. My husband's waking up the girls. I'm trying to get this done before I go to the shop because I have like a week before I won't be long arming, sewing, or doing anything for I don't know how long after my shoulder surgery. So I forgive myself. I'm just annoyed. I will show you if you haven't seen me do this before, because I rip a lot. Some people pick when they have to seam rip. Don't pick. Get that thing started and then you can do this. Slide it up against that seam and carefully, you don't want to go too fast, just drag it along those stitches. I have a lot of intersections, so when I reach the intersection I go slower, but that way it just pulls that cutting side of your seam ripper right along that edge. If it gets a little tight, don't force it. You don't want to poke a hole. I just flip it and then it's 6:30 in the morning, forgive my house. Then you can just keep going until you get to the end and re-stitch. I press, and also I love this end. It's a rubby end. Oh my gosh, the dog is fighting with the cat. And get those stitches, little bits of thread off. And there we have it. So you just piece those long strips together. Hopefully I changed my directions. If not, I'm done seam ripping for the morning. So that's it. That's a friendship braid. I think it's I can just come down, sew my braids, and just sort of decompress from the day. If you like this video, please click the like button, subscribe, share on social media. This will be my last video for a while after I have surgery on my shoulder. I don't know how long it'll be before I can do anything. So we're going to focus more on our on-demand classes. So I'm hoping to be doing some videos that will be available for purchase from start to beginning, working you through a collage or a cartonnage or a simple quilting for our beginner quilters. So make sure you follow us on social media. Go to our website, click, there's a box that comes up to subscribe to the newsletter. Make sure you're subscribed to that. And we will keep the content coming. So thanks. Make yourself a friendship braid. This is a great, like if any of you move your sewing machines out to your porch to sew during the summer so you can get some air, rather than have to deal with all of this cutting as you go or worrying about pieces, I think this is a great summer project because you can look back and I can remember what I used when it arrived in the shop. So that's my friendship braid quilt. I'm gonna go throw it on the long arm to look at it longingly because I won't be long arming for a while. My shoulder is shot. So have a great day. Thanks. See you next time.